So, to be or not to be, we have two verbs for to be, ser and estar. Let's look at just ser first. Soy, eres, es, somos, son. Both of the verbs ser and estar mean I am, you are, he, she is, we are, they are. Some uses for the verb ser. One is date, hour, time, anything to do with basically date and time will always be the verb ser. If you remember when we started from Spanish 1, that's what we always used. Hoy es el, or cuál es la fecha de hoy. We always use the verb ser there. Okay. Also with time, we used es la or son las, also using the verb ser. So that's always one of the reasons for using ser. Another one, I put these two in the same color because place of origin is basically asking where you're from. Nationality also is basically talking about where you're from. So place of origin, de donde eres, where are you from? Soy de, wherever you're from. Nationality is basically I am American versus I am from the United States. So two very similar reasons there. Occupation or profession, basically your job. That will always be the verb ser. So yes, I know anybody can change their job at any time. And that you won't always be a student, but for right now, your job is being a student, so that's ser. Material something is made out of, basically, that is usually something permanent. You can't change what something is made out of. Okay. Possession and relationship of one person to another, very similar there. Possession, if we were undoing the apostrophe S like we were doing last chapter, we always use de, and de is always a clue for ser. What does de mean? Of or from. From tells you about origin. Of is talking about usually possession or a relationship of one person to another. So he is her boyfriend, he is the boyfriend of her. We could use it different ways there. But usually any of your family words that we used last chapter, we're using with relationship, which would be a reason for ser. 8 and 9, also very similar. Essential qualities, basically talking about a personality trait of somebody versus a characteristic talking about the way that they look. So usually adjectives, you're talking about a description of somebody. In any description, you may want to go back and look at some of your chapter 1 adjectives. Those description words like viejo for old, and nuevo for new, and divertido for fun, and simpático. Not sure if you have that one in your vocab, but I put it in your notes here because you'll probably see this one a lot. Somebody being nice, you're talking about a personality or personality trait or a personal characteristic. Okay. This is where it was one of the tricky ones. If you're talking about a fact, Atlanta is the capital of Georgia, that is something that is permanent. If you're talking about where something is taking place, that is where it's going to always be taking place, although, of course, venues can always change. So just because you see the name of a place does not mean it's a location. Look at the sentence, see what it's saying. Look for those key words like de, of somebody being over from somewhere, of with possession. But when you're looking at the name of a place, basically don't just always assume location. It can be a fact. I like to use COP as the shortened acronym for reasons for ser. Does this encompass all of your reasons, COP? No. But these are the ones used most often. So you can use characteristic, origin, or occupation, and permanence, keeping in mind that things aren't always permanent or temporary, although that is the essential distinction between ser and estar. Okay? Estar, let's look at it by itself. Estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. You've got to have your very clear accents on your A's there. Basically, the top two don't have it, the bottom three have it. So very clear accents. Okay. One of the, or some of the uses, you can go ahead and look at the acronym. I made it shorter up here on this part. I made it a little bit more explanation over here on underneath. Position is basically I am in class. I'm on a chair. Anytime you see the word en, in, on, or at, what does that signal to you? Location, yeah. So it'll always be the verb estar. Okay, so position and location to me, Very, very similar. That's why I like to use, instead of place, I like to use let, because position and location are very similar, so I use those two with just the L here. This let doesn't include action, but hopefully remember that action, something being in progress, is using the ing form, which is present progressive that we went over last chapter. So anytime you see in Spanish ANDO or INDO, or in English ING, you'll know that you always have to use a form of estar with it, because it's temporary, it's in progress, it won't always be in progress. Okay. A condition and emotion, to me, those two are very similar, so I use condition and emotion just by using the E on emotion right here. Okay. So you can do it whichever way you would like, the place acronym or the LAT acronym, but just know that estar is more temporary, sed is more permanent, but we can't always rely on those two reasons alone. Okay. Some clues for estar. The en always tells you location, or any of these location words. I put them on here for you so that you don't have to take out another vocab sheet. But the word, the phrase, al lado de, means next to. So don't use this de. Normally, de is a reason for your verb sed. In this case, we're using it as a phrase. Al lado de means next to. Cerca de, as seen as together, basically. So both of those words mean near. Both of those words mean around. Okay. Usually when you're talking about a location of something, or you're asking where something is, then you're always going to use estar. And here are some clues that could be for both. We're going to try to stay away from some of the tricky ones, but this one should be very clear. If you have a subject and then a blank that where you're going to put the verb and then an adjective, it can be a description. She is pretty. That's a characteristic of her. That's going to be the verb sed. That's something that's more permanent. But what about if she's normally, she's just okay. But today, she did her hair, she did her makeup, she looks especially pretty today. But what if I put the word today, what does that do to the sentence? Right, so it is now a temporary thing, so it can also be sed and estar are both acceptable answers. Estar is more of an answer here when it becomes temporary with the today, but if it's just a description, then we're going to do sed. Okay. The other slide that we looked at, he is boring. That's a personality trait, which should be sed or estar. We're talking about a characteristic of somebody or describing somebody. That would be sed. But what if he's bored? Right, because that's not we're not gonna always be bored. Well, some people are, but it's a condition or a state that changes will always be estar. Okay. And then be very careful when you see the name of a place. You can be from a place, or you can be in a place. What's the difference?
Well, where you from a place, that's origin.
Right? So origin versus location of where you are in. Okay? All right, I gave you on your notes the officer reminder there for COP. That's the shortened acronym I like to use. It doesn't encompass date and time and all those other things we know about sed. Okay. This is the one that the previous slide that we went over gives you. I don't really like this one. So you can use COP. You can use that other one. You can use the Dr. Pepper, which encompasses kind of more of those reasons there. These are all reasons for sed. I gave you estar, the less short, I guess, acronym. PLACE, position, location, action, condition, emotion. Don't forget your accents with the verb estar. Here's the slide that we looked at that talks about origin always using sed, location always using estar, but where something is taking place, even though we're talking about a location, it's a fact, basically, and so that would be using sed. Okay. Also in your notes, I just gave you kind of summary slides there that I found if you like to see it side by side. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go through each of these sentences. We're going to do them in English first, and then we're going to switch to Spanish tomorrow. She is from Cuba. What is that saying? Origin. So write the reason, origin, right here. What verb is origin one of the reasons for? Said. So you don't need to conjugate it for now. I just want you to tell me, is it said or estad, and tell me why. Okay? This is going to be part of your work that you're going to do. I want you to, let's go ahead and do these together. Go ahead and skip down to these. I want you to fill in the blanks as we're doing them out loud. So let's do them together. Fill them in as we're doing them on your notes. Okay? I am not your mother. If I were to say that in Spanish, would that be said or estad?
Yeah.
Why? True. Don't always use the permanent temporary distinction. Use one of your other reasons. What are we talking about here? Go back to your reasons. Which one of these are we talking about? Could be occupation. It does feel like one sometimes. But a relationship of one person to another, or technically possession as well, could be used there. Okay. So number 1 would be said, and family relationship. What about number 2? You all are studying. Would it be said or estad? Estad. Why? True. Anytime you see ing, remember it's present progressive. Always have to use estad because it is a temporary in progress. Ing won't always be happening. So that in English, ing is your clue here. In Spanish, ando or iendo will always be a clue for estad. Which technically, if you want to add up to the top of your notes right here, one of your clues for estad would be a subject, and then whichever verb you're going to put in the blank is always going to be estad if you see that ando or iendo, because that's the ing in progress, not a temporary thing. Okay. And then let's go back to number 3. My father is tall. Good. Said. Characteristic. Students are sleepy. Because? Right? And it's a condition. Something that we usually change. Today's your birthday. Anytime you're dealing with time or date, will always be said. Teacher's pretty today. The today makes it temporary. If I took that away, then that would be said, because that would be a description or a characteristic. But since we have today there, then that's temporary, which would be estad. What about 7? If you're asking, if somebody's Puerto Rican, what are you asking about? Origin or nationality. Okay, so that would always be said. What about 8? She is at the party. Location, so that'll always be estad. Good. My mother is in Miami. Location as well. Good. Also be estad. Y'all are sitting. Estad because it is temporary, but again, use the more specific reason as present progressive or in action in progress. My daughter is a ballerina. Would be characteristic, so which verb? Could also be occupation. Either way, characteristic or occupation are both reasons for what verb? Said. So as long as you've got the right verb, you're good. You don't have to technically give me the exact reason. And last one for this one, Mary is a student. Right, occupation. You could do characteristic too, or description. Both are reasons for said, so it would be is if we were actually translating it. So you're going to have 2 quizzes. The first quiz is going to be with sentences in English and these reasons that we just went over, and that's what you're going to practice for homework. I want you to choose said or estar for these right here. Okay, and then put next to it, it's always good to have why you picked it so that you can always know when you were thinking about whichever verb, why it is the reason why it is, and then if you get it wrong, you'll know what you were thinking at the time and what it actually is. So I want you to fill in. This way is just broken up into said or estar and then the reason. We've already done these together. So we're going to start these out in English, and then we're going to switch them to Spanish. Okay, tomorrow. So let's get the reasons down first and why we use each one before we switch to actually conjugating them in Spanish. Also on your notes, I gave you some extra notes with extra examples of the verb said for using descriptions, date, time, etc. And for estar, usually using location, emotion, condition. I like to use these 2 acronyms. It doesn't really matter what you use as long as you know which one works with which verb. Okay. COP doesn't really encompass all of them. LET, again, the permanent temporary characteristic or distinction shouldn't always be your reason. You should think of some of the other reasons. And then I gave you some extra down here if you want to use some sample sentences on the bottom. You can fill those in as well for both said and estar. And some extra practice on the bottom. And then we will actually get to the song tomorrow, and we'll start seeing why some of these words are, for said, you're usually going to use your adjectives. For estar, you're going to use, or you're going to see some of these location words and different things. Questions so far?